Alright, hello for real this time. I muted instead of actively unmuting, but that's fine. So today I'm going to be talking about, contemplating, just verbally discussing, thinking through how, or like the concept of being young, especially in relation to my, channel name, Young, Gifted, and Black. Making that like 4 years ago or something like that, and now feeling way less young than I did then, and in my late 20s and trying to navigate what it is to be young at this point when I'm not feeling oh so young anymore, or I'm not feeling young. I feel like we spend a lot of our youth thinking about, or we spend a lot of our youth kind of feeling old. I remember being in high school being like, oh, I'm like so old now. Like all of the freshmen and all of the, sophomores and stuff. And I'm a senior. I'm like so old. And in college, you have like a brief window where you feel like, because you're like the youngest person there, and then you feel old again. And now, being in my late 20s, feeling old again, like, or even being early 30s, like being 30, is that old? You know what I mean? It doesn't scream young, but it also doesn't say old. And I'm just like going through the idea or the concept of like, exiting my 20s, entering my 30s soon, and going and understanding what it is to be young. Because I have a very young spirit, but I have an old soul at the same time. But, oh, my laptop's dying. Put that away. But at the same time, feeling like any amount of age accumulation makes you less young. I mean, that's fact, but like just feeling the weight of it, or feeling like, I remember when I first started entering my late 20s, freaking out about like how close to 30 I am. I'm like closer to 30. And now that I'm like, closer now, still, I feel like I've resolved it, or like the mental load is less. And I know like older people will probably like think about this, or listen to this, and like kind of, I feel like this is almost like a video archive, or like a audio archive of how I'm feeling, because in not even 10 years I will be looking back and being like, what was I thinking? But right now I'm thinking my thoughts. So, I think there's a lot of value in youth, that when you age, you feel more like your value is deteriorating, or it's getting, I don't know, it's becoming less, yeah, it's just becoming less. And even though that might be like a warped concept, it still might be true, like in our current society, which I have opinions about, but like nothing that's worth just working through. But for the most part, I'm just becoming hyper aware of the concept of being older, and what does that mean for young Do I change the name? Do I say young-ish? That's not bad, but maybe, you know, because, you know, you start over every so often. So like 4 years ago when I was starting this, I was like, that's great. This is a great name. This is a great concept. I'm gonna, you know, really take this and run with it. But young ultimately has an expiration date, or not a tangible expiration date, not a solid expiration date. It reminds me of, I can't remember what the concept was. I can't remember what the name of the concept was, but the concept was, basically, if you have a grain of sand and then you have like a heap or a pile of sand, how many grains of sand until that the amount of sand becomes like a pile of sand? And is it 5, 10? Like, where is that line? And much like that, aging is not really, it doesn't have a distinct point of finality where it's like, this is the young, this is the old. So even though I'm still quite young, it has this distinction of like, this is where's that line? And it's almost like a collectivism, like a collective awareness that we kind of know when you're like not young, you know what I mean? But you don't have a concept of when you're like, you're not old, but you're not young. So there's no real set markers. And honestly, it could be defined by whatever you choose it to define it by. So having that concept be kind of like the mainstay of young, it makes it more contemplative. But I really wanted to play with these 3 concepts more. And even though I myself am not as young, or I still consider myself young, maybe when I'm like 37, I'll be like, that's old. Or not old, but like I wouldn't say a 37-year-old is young. But when in high school, I remember being a child. This is so funny. I remember being like, 25, like in middle school, high school, middle school, elementary school, I would say. I remember being like, 25 is so old. And I'm like, I don't know why. Not even a quarter of your maybe potential lifespan. But I don't know. It's just like you have these concepts, and young and old are warped and stretched by the people who are observing it, much like all different, any manner of matter. Like I just heard about the study with the stars where they put a telescope into a blank spot in the sky that they didn't know if they had, like they didn't see anything before, and they just let I guess the aperture like absorb as much light as it could, and then stars appeared, and then they said something like very esoteric, like, oh, reality is made when you observe it, or something like that. Science discovers. And I just think that kind of concept, my hands are so dry, but let me stay focused. That kind of concept of the thing that is absorbing it, observing it, also is partaking in the creation of it. It's almost like the way when you have words, right? When you create the word for the thing, you are almost concretifying it at the same time. Like you are participating in its existence, which is such a kind of basic, not even basic, like a small way of explaining what's happening. It's not like very, it doesn't have a lot of depth to it. It's like, oh, you're participating in its existence, or you're creating it, or you're experiencing it. It's the same as, like, for example, like the concept, I thought about this, I think about this a lot, where there's no such thing as the color brown. I watched a video, and I probably will never be able to find it again because I keep no notes. I don't save anything. But the video was how there isn't a concept of the color brown. Or even other colors, like green doesn't exist in certain cultures. They bring up Japan, which is a common example of how green is not it's a relatively new color to the consciousness, I guess. And they used to only have black, blue, and red, or something like that. I didn't prepare this, so I don't remember off the top of my head all the things. But in cultures where they don't have a word to define those colors, you don't have, like, when you look at those colors, or you have children, a spectrum of children, look at those colors, they can easily confuse something that's green for blue because they can't see the difference because we haven't defined it very clearly. And because it is a spectrum, like color is a spectrum, I think there was another, I can't remember, it was a tribe in, can't remember if it was East or West Africa, which is a very large spread, but it was describing how they couldn't see, or they could see the difference between many different types of red and browns and different things like that, but they couldn't see the difference between certain greens and blues because it was all lumped into one color. And back in the day, we all lumped those colors back in together. But for the most part, I'm thinking about, or what I was trying to get at with that whole spew about color was that the guy talked about how brown isn't a real color, and then he said, I'm going to prove it to you. I'm going to go to the color wheel. On this color wheel, there is no brown. I'm going to zoom into this orange, and then I'm going to slowly bring the hue down, and then you'll see it still looks orange to you. And then he'll take it and he put it on like a different, like he put it on a white background, like a swatch of the color that we were looking at on a white background, and then zoomed out, and we're like, oh, that's clearly brown. Like, that's just straight up the color brown. And we were not able to see it because I have no idea why, but it was such an interesting experiment to be like, things are so much on us, like we couldn't really conceptualize a lot of things until we categorize them. And working through this thought, like categorizing youth, I feel like we could get a pretty big spread, almost like a bell curve spread of what people would say, this is young, that's young. And, babies will be like 10 is old, and, people who are in their 70s might be like, you know what, if you're 50, you're still really young, and I guess I'm trying to figure out what spread I want to reflect me getting older in my age and my big age. What spread am I? Where am I on the spectrum of, am I in the lower half of the spectrum where it's like the youth would consider me young? Probably not. I don't think so. But like the youth into people my age and maybe a little bit older than me, and then, or the spectrum where people who are older would consider me young. Well, I mean, I'm sure I'm pretty sure there's nobody who's like, you're in your 20s and you're old, you know? But I'm sure, like, I mean, older, much older people wouldn't think that, but I'm sure, like, if we were to put on a curve, what group of people would categorize, like, what group would also put a Venn diagram bubble around me being young? And for some reason that's something I value and I want, probably because of the whole worth depreciation thing that we talked about earlier. But, and who do I value that coming from? Okay, that wasn't a proper sentence, but I hope that made sense. Like, I hope that spectrum is pretty clear. And as things are like shifting around right now in my life, I just like this format of contemplating and thinking through a thought for the most part. I didn't have like this rounding conclusion made up when I started, but you know, I feel like thinking it out loud and using my words and expressing things in a space where I feel the need to over dramatize what I'm saying or speak with more clarity and come across with more prestige because of the whole I guess the word is missing me, but like the entire just the connotations around like giftedness as well, and feeling like I can speak through. It helps me to like kind of think my thought in a more thorough fashion with like maybe even more flowery words or more, I don't know, conceptualized thoughts and more abstract thoughts that are kind of pulled together. And coming to that conclusion, I don't know, you know, there's no real defined young, you know what I mean? But yeah, it reminds me of a story I was watching where the woman was like, if you look at a picture of yourself when you were like 5, you have to construct a whole narrative about like that 5-year-old picture of you all the way up to your current self, because pretty much all of the cells in your body have changed, you know, like in like a ship of Theseus type of way, where it's like, when did, you know, you stop being you? Or not that you would stop being you, but like you've completely, everything about you that existed in that point in time is gone, except for a string of memories. And so you have to construct yourself and tie yourself. You don't look like that now. You may look similar to that, but you're not like a 5-year-old size. Maybe you are if you're 5, I don't know. If you're 5, this video is not for children. But you know, live and let life. But if you like, how do we construct ourselves as a concept? And we have this whole like convoluted method of thinking about who we are and connecting that to like a picture of you as yourself as 5. But that's not like you now. Anyway, I think I'm getting past the contemplation aspects and going into more of a rambling type of aspect, which is fine for this context, but I just wanted to hop on and contemplate what it is to be young and how that is and how that feels from like my perspective. Yeah, so hopefully this video exists and I didn't talk into the void, and if so, you know, live in love. Am I live? Only time will tell. But in the meantime, if you've watched this and heard this and understood it and wanted to hear more, do the things that would allow that to be the reality that you live in. And until next time, I might come up with some catchy phrases and make a more of a channel like. But for now, I am signing off, and I hope to hear or contemplate with this format again. So thank you so much. All right, have a great rest of your day. I will try to have a great rest of mine. All right, bye.